On the sunny shores of the Aegean Sea, more than 2,000 years ago, a civilization flourished that even today continues to shape our way of thinking, governing, and consuming. Ancient Greece, cradle of philosophers, playwrights, and warriors, was also a society deeply marked by the desire to possess, show, and distinguish oneself through what one had. Consumption was not just a necessity, it was a symbol of status, power, and sometimes identity. Between temples, agoras, and theaters, Athenian citizens competed not only in debates and wars, but also in banquets, fashions, and luxuries. Through this journey, we will explore how this consumer culture was built, who were its protagonists, what it meant to spend in a world where many could not afford to do so, and how, in the midst of the splendor, the seeds of inequality were also sown. This is where our story begins. Let's imagine an ordinary day in Athens, around 430 BC, at the height of democracy and Greek cultural genius. The city bustles with the noise of merchants in the agora, the voices of philosophers under the colonnades, and the hammering of artisans in their workshops. Here lives Callistratus, a free citizen, merchant of luxury fabrics, heir to a small fortune that his father amassed trading Egyptian linen and Phoenician dyes. He is in his early 30s and has managed to climb the social ladder not because of his lineage, but because of his business acumen and his impeccable taste for foreign novelties. For Callistrato, consumption is not just pleasure, it is strategy. The tunic he wears, the oil with which he perfumes his beard, the wine he serves at his banquets, everything communicates. And in a society that respects sophrosine, moderation, he subtly dances on the edge of excess without losing the respect of his people. But Callistratus does not live alone. He shares his house with his wife, Melita, a woman with a sharp look and a restrained voice, relegated, like many, to the domestic sphere. Although invisible in public spaces, Melita has a precise understanding of the social networks that are woven into feminine rituals, baths, religious celebrations, marital alliances. She understands the silent language of consumption, what fabric to wear at a ceremony, how much silver to display in a wedding gift without appearing ostentatious, how to use appearance to elevate the family's standing. There is also his domestic slave, Roxane, originally from Thrace. Although her condition deprives her of rights, her proximity to Melita grants her silent power. He is the one who knows every corner of the house, who masters the cooking, the perfumes, the home rituals. Roxana observes how she consumes herself, what she values, and how the desire for luxury, which will never be hers, allows her to stay useful and alive. Finally, it is Eutychus, the young son of Callistratus, barely 12 years old, who begins to accompany his father to the agora. Observe with curiosity how prices are negotiated, how you choose who to greet and who to ignore. The child does not know it yet, but he is being trained in consumer culture from childhood, learning that appearance and reputation can be more valuable than the coins that jiggle in the stock market. Together, they represent different layers of that unequal Athens, where consumption has a masculine face but a family root, where the enslaved participate in opulence without touching their reward, and where women from the shadows exercise a power that is rarely named. In this city where the Parthenon still smells of freshly carved marble and the voices of Socrates and Pericles echo through the crowd, daily life revolves around the visible and the invisible. Bread, oil, textiles, perfumes, banquets are elements of a social dance where each gesture has a meaning, but this desire to distinguish oneself through consumption does not arise from a vacuum. It is nourished by a society in constant competition, where glory is not achieved only with spear and shield, but also with the cups that are raised in the symposium and the robes that dazzle under the sun. And at the heart of this dynamic, Callistratus has a plan: organize a grand banquet to welcome a Corinthian merchant who arrives in Athens with new exotic goods. It will be an opportunity to strengthen alliances, show off your purchasing power, and perhaps close a deal that elevates you even higher in the social hierarchy. But not everyone around him welcomes such a display of luxury. The day starts early at Callistrato's house. The light enters through the cracks in the wooden blinds, and the crowing of the roosters announces the start of the activities. As in many wealthy houses in Athens, the home is divided by functions: the public and the private, the masculine and the feminine. Callistratus wakes up in the andron, the area reserved for men, specially designed to receive visitors and hold symposiums. While washing his face with fresh water brought by Roxana, he carefully applies an oil scented with essences of cypress and myrrh. Scent is not simply a personal taste, it is a statement. In Athens, perfume, when used sparingly, communicates refinement. Using it excessively, however, can suggest decadence, oriental influence, effeminacy. Every drop counts. In the Gynoecium, the women's space, Melite also begins her day. Unlike her husband, she won't go outside, but that doesn't mean her day lacks purpose. Supervise the maids, coordinate the preparations for the banquet, check the embroidered cloaks that will serve as decorations and gifts. She has learned over the years to read her husband's needs, even when he doesn't say them. If she wants to impress her guests, the details will have to be impeccable. She herself chooses which silver cup will be used, which nuts will adorn the tables which hymn the hired flutists will sing. Roxana, for her part, has been awake since before dawn. In charge of grinding grain for bread, preparing the breakfast of oatmeal with figs and cleaning the atrium, her routine is physical and silent. But between tasks, listen. Listen to the conversations between Melite and another woman from a noble house who has come to coincidentally offer a loan of luxury ceramic plates. He listens to Callistratus give instructions on how to receive the Corinthian merchant. Listen and memorize, because in their world, knowledge is the only possession that cannot be taken away. Meanwhile, on the street, the city is shaking. The agora is the nerve center of consumption, commerce and political gossip. Callistratus, with his impeccable tunic, walks through the stalls of fruits, ceramics, sculptures and slaves. He is not just a buyer, he is an observer. He knows that consumption is an art, and that in democratic Athens reputation is built both on the platform and in the market. There he finds the Corinthian merchant, a man with skin tanned by the sea and sand, with a shrewd gaze. She brings with her fabrics dyed with Tyrian purple, a color so expensive that only a few can afford it. Callistratus is interested, but not too interested. In Athens, whoever is desperate to buy loses respect. Negotiate calmly, offer a wine, make detours, offer an invitation. Maybe tomorrow at my house we can talk more time, he tells her. The deal is not done, but the subtle consumer battle has begun. Back home, Eutyches runs to him. He asks him questions about the market, about the statues he saw, about a beggar who talked about Diogenes, the philosopher who despised wealth and lived in a barrel. Callistratus smiles indulgently. A man can talk against gold all he wants, he says, but the world moves with it. During the rest of the day, preparations intensify. The banquet will be that same night, and a large attendance is expected. Merchants, influential neighbors, a poet who is gaining renown, and some young nobleman with political aspirations. Every guest is an opportunity. As evening falls, the central patio transforms. Perfumed torches illuminate the columns. Musicians tune their instruments, the glasses are ready. In Athens, the banquet is not just a meal. It is a spectacle, an investment, a declaration of power and style. Melite watches from the shadows. He will not participate directly in the symposium, but every detail bears his invisible signature. Even Roxana, dressed in a clean tunic, distributes the wines, knowing that every smile, every gesture can tip the balance between a good memory and a failed alliance. Everything seems prepared. The night is approaching, and with it, a delicate dance between desire, appearance, and power. Night falls on Athens, and the long shadows of the columns dance in the light of the torches. In the courtyard of Callistratus's house, the murmur of the guests begins to fill the space like a rising river. Men wrapped in finely woven hymatia, with rings on their fingers and glasses of wine in their hands, settle on the clines, the divans surrounding the symposium hall, as measured greetings, veiled flattery, and appraising glances are exchanged. The banquet has begun. The first service is modest. Black Messinian olives, barley bread, dried figs, and a red wine diluted with water, as customs dictate, but it's just the preamble. What follows is a calculated escalation of flavors, aromas, and textures. Herbed fish, goat cheese, honey cake. Every plate, every glass that is filled is an unsaid message. Callistrato knows that his guests are judging not only the food, but the execution, the taste, the rhythm of the meeting. In a world without Instagram or society columns, prestige is built on these nights and is transmitted through oral stories the next day. Among the guests stands out Leontios, a young aristocrat with political aspirations, known for his taste, for the Spartan and the sober, at least in public. It is also Simoco, an old poet, fond of spicy anecdotes, whose wit attracts as much as it repels. The Corinthian merchant, Menecrates, observes the group dynamics with a clinical eye. He doesn't drink too much, he doesn't laugh too loud. It is there to evaluate as much as to be evaluated. The conversation revolves around the latest news of the Peloponnesian War. A young man mentions Pericles' new strategies. Another, half-drunk, recites fragments of Euripides. But soon, as expected, the inevitable topic arises: luxury. They say that in Sardis the banquets even include stuffed peacock, says one, savoring an olive. How far can waste go before it becomes Persian? A subtle tension hangs in the air. In Athens, luxury is an ambivalent topic. It is desired, pursued, but also feared. It is the face of wealth and the reflection of the Eastern enemy. Callistratus intervenes with a tempered smile. Luxury is not the problem, friends. It is the forgetfulness of virtue that makes us slaves. As long as we know how to distinguish between gold and truth, wine and reason, we will be Greeks, not barbarians. Some nod, others murmur. Leontios pours himself more wine in silence. At a key moment of the night, a flutist enters the courtyard accompanied by a slave carrying a polished wooden box. Inside, objects that have not been seen before in Athens. A cup of Phoenician design, an ivory statuette carved with Egyptian symbols, a purple cloth deep as twilight. Menecrates has brought them as a sample of his merchandise. He exhibits them as if presenting jewels from another world. The murmurs grow, the eyes shine. One of the guests even dares to touch the statuette with almost religious reverence. This, says Menecrates, is not found anywhere in Greece, and it will only be available to a few. The phrase rings like a silent bell. It's not just an offer, it's a challenge. Who among them can afford such objects? Who will dare to possess the exotic without appearing servile to the foreign? Callistratus knows the time has come. Raise your glass and toast to commerce, to the Geo, alliance between cities, to the possibility of bringing the best of the world to Athenian homes. Without forgetting what makes them unique. It's a risky move, balancing the desire for the rare with the pride in one's own. After the toast, the conversation flows again. But something has changed. The guests, still smiling, have entered a field where every gesture matters more. Leontios comments without looking at anyone. My father said that the beautiful and the good must go together. But sometimes beauty comes shrouded in shadows. A poisonous comment. Callistratus smiles, does not respond. He knows that luxury, although desired, will always be suspect. The night advances. You sing, you laugh, you discuss. But the real event has already occurred. A seed has been planted, a symbol, an opportunity, and perhaps a threat. Because in Athens, where appearance is everything, a cup can be mightier than a sword. The next morning, the banquet still echoes in the corridors of Callistratus's house. The empty glasses, the remains of fruits and nuts, and the lingering aroma of spilled wine are the visible traces of a night that was much more than celebration. It was a staging, a political act, a declaration. Melite walks around the patio collecting fragments of the evening. Look at the dirty sheets, the ash marks on the marble, the withered flowers. For her, the important thing is not what was said, but what was not said. He noticed Leontios's silence, the way he avoided tasting the Phoenician cup, how he said goodbye with a dry, almost hostile courtesy. He knows by instinct that not everyone came out convinced. Meanwhile, in the city, the echo of the banquet spreads quickly. In the barbershops, the markets, the gyms, it is murmured, "Did you see the fabrics that Callistratus showed? They say that the merchant came from Cyprus, which brings pure gold. But isn't that a bit excessive? Is he not betraying Athenian austerity?" Consumption in Athens is not just pleasure, it is a mirror, and everyone sees themselves reflected in their own way. For some, the luxury of Callistratus is inspiration. For others, it is a sign of decline. Roxana, from her corner, also observes. Listen to the comments of the other maids at the fountain. Notice how the house has changed its energy. Melite is more tense, Callistratus more thoughtful. She doesn't know it yet, but the Corinthian merchant has refused to sign the deal for now. "Too ostentatious," he said. "Maybe later when the tide turns." In the world of free men, that delay can mean a lot. Miscalculated luxury can be read as weakness, as anxiety to appear. And in a society that reveres containment as much as victory, any sign of excess can become a weapon, but not everyone reacts the same. On a corner in Athens, in a gym bathed by the midday breeze, a group of young people discuss animatedly. Among them is Cleisthenes, an aspiring politician, charismatic and acerbic. He defends Callistratus. "Don't you realize? He is doing what everyone wants to do but doesn't dare, bringing luxury without dragging. Show power without asking permission. What if we lose our identity in the process?" answers another. "What if we end up looking more like the Persians than the Greeks?" "Identity," says Cleisthenes with a crooked smile. "Our identity is to adapt, innovate, dominate. The rest is fear." The Greek spirit moves in this tension between tradition and innovation. The paradox of a culture that glorifies the gods but also humanizes them, that venerates virtue but applauds ingenuity, who fears luxury but can't look away from its shine. At home, Callistratus meets with two close friends. They speak in low voices. One advises him to moderate his image. The other encourages him to go further, to import more products, to open a store in the agora with luxury items. They both admire him, but with nuances. One sees it as a model of balance, the other as a pioneer of a new economic order. Melite, from the Gynoecium, hears fragments of the conversation. Make a decision. Ask Roxana to prepare a package with some of the objects brought by Menocrates, the Phoenician cup, the statuette, and a small box of spices. Then, he writes a note by hand in his careful handwriting. For Leontios' wife, as a sign of respect and friendship, may the foreign not cloud the true. It is a subtle, diplomatic, intelligent gesture. Melite understands that luxury should not impose but seduce. And you know that among women, sometimes gifts say more than speeches. Meanwhile, Eutyches, in his innocence, repeats phrases he heard the night before. Imitate the guests. Try to speak like them. He watches his father and wants to be like him. But when he sees Roxana, exhausted after cleaning the dishes for hours, he approaches with some water and a smile. She looks at him surprised. For a moment, the world is balanced, even if it's for a moment. In the following weeks, reactions to Callistratus's banquet diverge. Some praise him for his audacity, others criticize him for his impudence. The Corinthian merchant leaves, promising to return when times are more propitious. Leontios seems increasingly distant, but there is something that no one can deny. Everyone talks about him. In Athens, there is no advertising more powerful than rumor. Athens continued to pulse with intensity, but in its alleys, squares, and porticos, something was beginning to change. Admiration for the splendor was beginning to give way to suspicion. Callistratus, until recently a figure celebrated for his refinement and commercial vision, was beginning to attract glances tinged with suspicion. The splendor of their banquet had not gone unnoticed, but beyond amazement, it had sown collective concern. In a city where restraint and balance were civic, virtue's excess, even symbolic excess, could be understood as a threat. The notification of the ball, it didn't take long to arrive. In a formal tone, and without direct accusations, Callistratus was requested to be present to clarify certain aspects of his recent activities. especially those linked to trade with foreigners and the introduction of non-traditional luxury objects in public contexts. The request was less a legal accusation and more a veiled warning. The police was watching, and not with benevolence. While the rumors spread like ivy between the city walls, in his own house the tension became palpable. Melit, always sharp, clearly perceived the shift in the public mood. He recognized the rehearsed gestures in the neighbors' looks, the sudden change of topic in the markets, the shorter greetings, the cancelled visits. Even among those closest to him, cracks were beginning to appear. The same people who praised exotic objects now spoke of excess, of decadence, of a departure from Hellenic ideals. Social silence was in Athens a punishment as stinging as any written law. Callistratus appeared before the council dressed with calculated restraint. Gone were the foreign linen tunics or minimal jewelry. That day, she chose rough wool, dull colors, almost bare feet. His entrance was sober, his attitude contained. He knew that beyond what he could say, his image had to speak for him. The council's questions were many, sharp and cold. He was questioned about the exact origin of the objects he presented, about the trade routes involved, about the legality of his dealings with foreigners, and about the intention to introduce non-Hellenic products into civic spaces where the ideal of citizenship should remain intact. For hours, he was held under that silent, elegant scrutiny, while the council members took notes and listened without passing judgment. The process was not legal but moral. Athens faced itself in that room, its desire for greatness and beauty, against its fear of losing its essence in the reflections of foreign luxury. In the streets, meanwhile, news of the appearance was mixed with speculation. In the gymnasiums and taverns, stories were woven with more imagination than certainty. For many, Callistratus represented a dangerous seduction towards the Persian, the Oriental, the soft. For others, it symbolized the inevitable evolution of an ever-expanding city. In the privacy of her home, Melit dealt with other signs of wear and tear. The visit of Alcidice, Leontios's wife, was one of them. Without a single aggressive word, the return of the foreign figurine that had been sent as a gift said everything necessary. It was not an explicit rejection, but it was a reminder that the aristocratic world played on many levels, and not all of them were visible. It was a cold gesture, one of those that is not forgotten. Melit then understood that influence, like power, was not sustained only with valuable objects, but with carefully woven alliances and subtle symbols. Roxana, meanwhile, continued to carry out her tasks with meticulous dedication. It was she who found, among the cushions at the symposium, a small amulet in the shape of a fish, carved in polished stone, forgotten by a guest. He kept it secret, not as a valuable object, but as a souvenir of a world he touched but did not possess. In his gesture there was a mixture of resignation and longing. In her own way, she also understood the weight of the symbolic Eutyches, still oblivious to political movements and social tensions, instead perceived the change of mood. In his house, he saw his father more absent, his mother more silent. He sensed, in his childhood still intact, that something had changed, that the glow of the party had faded, and in its place remained a denser, more lasting shadow. The night Callistratus returned from the council, Athens seemed to breathe more slowly. The wind between the columns of the Parthenon no longer carried the murmur of praise, but an expectant silence. Callistratus sat in his courtyard, alone, without saying a word. The decisions made in the darkness of that moment would define not only his future, but that of those around him. Because in Athens, consumption was not just an economic act, it was a language and sometimes a trial. The next day dawned in Athens without evident changes. The bustle of the market continued as always. Children ran between the columns of the agora, and the sun shone mercilessly on the city that never rested. But in the houses, in the hearts, something had remained. The echoes of Callistratus's banquet still resonated in every conversation, in every whisper. Melit, while organizing the house, thought about what had happened, about the tensions that had been unleashed. It wasn't just about the objects nor about the trade. It was something much deeper. The fear of losing the soul of a city that had always believed to be the center of the world. Athens, with all its splendor and art, was still fighting with itself. Tradition and innovation clashed, and luxury became the battlefield. Callistratus, for his part, watched the horizon from his house, knowing that his decision had marked a turning point. It didn't matter if he won or lost in the council meetings. What mattered was that Athens had witnessed a new way of understanding consumption, a way that challenged norms, that went beyond the limits of what was acceptable. And although not everyone would understand it, its mark would be engraved in history. That day, when the sun set behind the mountains, no one yet knew how the next page in the city's history would be written. But one thing was certain: consumption in ancient Greece, more than a material act, was always an act of power, of ideology, of belonging. And perhaps, beyond the visible riches, what was really consumed was the very identity of the polis.